In the summer of 1968, in a sealed room in Maryland, a scientist built a world with no death in it. Not as a figure of speech, deliberately. He sat down and made a list of every way a small animal can die in the wild. Starvation, thirst, cold, disease, the jaws of something larger. And then, one by one, he engineered each of them out of existence. Unlimited food, water that never ran dry, a climate held at a perfect, unchanging warmth. No predators, no weather, nothing to fear ever again. He called it a utopia, and he meant it without irony. Into this perfect world he placed 4 pairs of healthy young mice, 8 animals, in a paradise built to let them live forever. A little under 5 years later, every single one of them was dead. And here is the part that should stop you. Not one of those deaths was caused by anything a vet could have written on a chart. There was still food in the hoppers. There was still water in the bottles. The temperature never wavered. The thing that killed them all has no name in any medical textbook. And in a way that matters enormously, the population had already died long before the last body did. The scientist's name was John Calhoun. The experiment was called Universe 25. And you have almost certainly met it before, as a meme. You've seen the viral version. A perfect, comfortable society made the mice soft and lazy and weak. Abundance destroyed them. And we're next. Fat, coddled, doomed. Just like the mice in the cage. It gets passed around as a grim little prophecy about modern people. Too much comfort, too little struggle, collapse on the way. I want to tell you that this reading is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong in a way that gets the entire lesson backwards. The man who ran the experiment never said abundance was the killer. What he actually found is stranger and quieter and far more useful to you. Because it isn't really about cages or crowds or comfort at all. It's about something you have felt in a room full of people. The specific modern ache of being completely surrounded and still somehow alone. To get there, we have to walk through what really happened inside that pen. Past a group of males Calhoun gave a haunting name, the beautiful ones. All the way to a single sentence he used to open the most important talk of his life. Hold on to both of those. They're where the whole story turns. But to understand why his mice fell apart, you have to start somewhere that has nothing to do with mice. You have to start with the kind of world your own brain was built for. For more than 300,000 years, the entire lifespan of our species, human beings did not live among strangers. You lived in a band. 50 people, perhaps. 100. At the very outer edge, the figure the anthropologist Robin Dunbar made famous, around 150. The rough ceiling and the number of real relationships a human mind seems built to carry. And inside that small world, everything was woven together. The people you ate with were the people you slept beside, who were the people you faced danger with. Who were the people whose opinion of you decided your entire standing in the only society you would ever know. Food, safety, work, status, touch, belonging. These were not separate things you went out and collected from separate places. They were one fabric. To be fed was to be useful to someone. To be near a person was to be known by them. Calhoun's whole career circled a single, unsettling question. What happens to a deeply social animal when you keep its body alive, but tear that fabric apart? When you hand it everything it could possibly need, except a world that still makes sense. He had been asking it for decades. John B. Calhoun was an American ethologist who spent close to 30 years at the National Institute of Mental Health, and before Universe 25, he had built dozens of these little worlds. Rat cities, mouse utopias, each one numbered. And he had noticed something early that disturbed him. Long before his animals ran out of space or food, their populations would stall, and their societies would begin to rot from the inside. In a 1962 paper in Scientific American, he gave the rot a name that has outlived almost everything else he did. The behavioral sink. A place, usually a crowded feeder, where so many animals piled in together that ordinary behavior simply broke down and curdled into something pathological. The mice even learned to associate eating with the press of other bodies, until they would crowd into the most packed feeder in the pen and ignore the empty ones beside it. They no longer wanted food, they wanted the crowd. Universe 25 was his masterpiece, his 25th attempt, built at NIMH in 1968. Picture a square metal pen, about 4.5 feet on each side, small enough to lean over and watch the whole thing at once. But Calhoun had built it upward, like a city. 16 mesh tunnels climbed the walls like stairwells, opening onto 256 small nesting boxes, apartments, he called them, stacked in tidy tiers. 16 food hoppers, each able to feed dozens of mice at once. Banks of water bottles that could not be drained. You'd done the arithmetic in advance. The food could support around 9,500 animals before it ran short. The nests could hold nearly 4,000. The world he built could comfortably have housed a population the size of a small town. It would never come anywhere close. On the 9th of July, 1968, he set his 8 founders loose inside it. For the first 100 days or so, almost nothing happened. The mice squabbled, sorted themselves out, learned the geography of their new heaven. Calhoun called this the adjustment phase. And then, around day 104, the first litters were born. And the explosion began. This was the golden age. With nothing to kill them and everything to feed them, the population doubled roughly every 55 days. 8 became 16, became 32, became hundreds. Strong males claimed the best apartments and gathered groups of females around them. Pups were born, weaned, and grew. By day 315, there were around 620 mice in the pen, and from the outside, it looked like exactly what it was meant to be: a thriving, swelling, prosperous society. A success. It was, in fact, already breaking. Because a doubling population inside a fixed world eventually slams into a wall that has nothing to do with food. It runs out of roles. In a normal mouse society, a young male grows up, leaves, finds his own patch of ground, and becomes someone, a holder of territory, the center of his own small group. But in Universe 25, there was nowhere to leave to. Every territory was already taken, held, and defended. So an entire generation came of age into a world with no open positions, no empty ground to claim, no job in the only economy a mouse has. And with nothing to be, they had nowhere to go. So they began to pool. Calhoun watched crowds of these role-less young males collect in the open center of the pen. Dozens of them, listless, pressed together, going nowhere. And every so often the sheer density of bodies would detonate into violence. A sudden, pointless attack, one mouse savaging another who didn't even fight back, and the victim later rising to attack someone else in turn. Wounds that never healed. Aggression with no purpose and no end. The damage bled outward into everything. The territorial males, exhausted from defending their borders against the endless drifting crowd, started to fail. And as they failed, the nests they were supposed to shield fell open. The mothers, suddenly exposed, took up the defending themselves, and something in them broke under the strain. They turned their aggression on the only creatures small enough to lose to. Their own young. They attacked their pups. They abandoned them mid-nursing, carried them off and dropped them and forgot them, weaned them too early or simply stopped. Litters counted 1 week were gone the next. Conception slowed. Pregnancies failed. And the few young who did survive had been raised in chaos by mothers who never taught them how to be a mouse. So they grew into adults who had never learned the language of their own kind.
This is where the first of those 2 threads I asked you to hold comes back. In the final stretch, Calhoun called it, plainly, the death phase. A new kind of mouse appeared. The males who had been crowded out of every role did not all join the violent pool in the center. Some of them withdrew completely. They climbed to the highest, emptiest, safest apartments, and they removed themselves from mouse society altogether. They never fought. They never courted a female. They never tried to claim territory, or do any of the things a mouse exists to do. They only ate, and slept, and groomed. And because they never fought, they carried no scars. Because they did nothing but tend their own bodies, their coats grew sleek and flawless and unblemished. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. They were the healthiest-looking animals in the entire universe. Pristine. Immaculate. And they were, in every way that matters for a social species, already gone. Present in body, absent in every other sense. Incapable of connection, of mating, of any of the behaviors that turn a pile of animals into a society. The most beautiful mice in paradise were the emptiest. And here is the fact that quietly shatters the simple story. By the time the death phase set in, the pen was emptying out. The crowd was thinning. Space was opening back up. There was, if anything, more room and more abundance per mouse than there had ever been. And it changed nothing. The population had peaked at around 2,200 animals near day 560, far below the 4,000 the pen could have held. And then it began to fall. The last pup that would survive to grow up was born around day 600. After that, in a world still overflowing with food and water and empty apartments, the mice of Universe 25 simply stopped making more mice. Not because they couldn't, because they no longer knew how. By the summer of 1972, a population that had once topped 2,000 was down to 122 animals, and not one of them would ever breed again. Calhoun tried to save them. He lifted some of the beautiful ones out of the dying pen and moved them into spacious, calm, new enclosures, gave them healthy partners, every possible chance to begin again. They did nothing. The damage was not in their bodies and not in their surroundings. It was in them, written too deep to undo. They had suffered, he said, a near total loss of the capacity to be mice at all. When Calhoun stood up to explain all this, in 1972, before the Royal Society of Medicine in London, he opened with the sentence that is the second thread I asked you to hold. He said, "I shall largely speak of mice, but my thoughts are on man." He had never really been studying rodents. He believed he was watching a preview, and the conclusion he drew was almost biblical in its bleakness. His mice, he said, had died 2 deaths. The second death was the obvious one, the death of the body, the slow extinction of the colony. But it had been preceded by a very long time by what he called the first death, the death of the spirit. The moment the animals lost the ability to court, to parent, to fight, to belong, to do anything beyond the bare mechanics of staying alive. Autistic-like creatures, he wrote, capable only of the most simple behaviors compatible with physiological survival, emerge out of this process. Their spirit has died. The bodies kept moving for a while after that, but the society was already a corpse.
So now go back to the meme. Abundance made them soft. Comfort killed them. We're next. Look at what actually happened, and you can see how badly that misses. The food was never the problem. There was food to the very end. Comforts did not kill these mice. What killed them was that their world filled up with far more animals than it had meaningful roles to give. And a mouse with no role, no territory, no place in the order, is a mouse with nothing to do and no one to be. The thing that collapsed first was never their health or their resources. It was the structure of their society, the web of jobs and ranks and bonds that told each animal where it fit. Calhoun's universe did not die of plenty. It died of meaninglessness. And now the most important sentence in this entire video, because a channel that frightens you with a lie is not worth your evening. You are not a mouse, and you are not doomed. The temptation here is enormous, to point at the beautiful ones and say, that's us. That's the lonely modern man. That's the falling birth rate. We are living inside Universe 25. Be very careful with that leap. The scientists who came after Calhoun spent years pushing back on exactly it, and they were right to. His pen was a sealed box with no exits and no second chances. And that closed, escape-proof design, many researchers argued, was doing far more of the damage than crowding or abundance ever did. When the psychologist Jonathan Friedman went looking for these same effects in actual human beings, in dense cities, packed neighborhoods, crowded rooms, he largely couldn't find them. Pack people tightly together, and, it turns out, they mostly do fine. High density in humans is simply not the curse it was for the mice. We are not rodents in a tank. History is full of crowded cities that have thrived for centuries. Anyone who tells you a mouse experiment proves humanity is finished is selling you a feeling, not a fact. But there is one thread that runs from that pen straight into your life, and it is real. And it is the reason this story has haunted people for 50 years. It was never the crowding. The historian Edmund Ramsden, who has studied Calhoun's work more closely than almost anyone, put his finger on it.
The real driver wasn't density at all. It was role saturation. Too many animals for the number of meaningful positions the society could offer. And that, the uncoupling of having a body from having a place, is the part of the experiment you actually live inside. Remember the world your brain was built for. The one where food and safety and work and status and belonging were a single woven fabric, where to be near someone was to be known by them. Universe 25's deepest lesson is what happens to a social animal when you pull those threads apart. When you can have all the bodies and none of the bonds, all the proximity and none of the belonging, total safety and no purpose left to spend it on. You can stand on a train pressed against 40 strangers and not be truly known by one of them. You can have 1,000 followers and no one to call at 3 a.m. You can have your food delivered, your wage earned on a screen, your entertainment infinite, every physical need met by a vast system that never once requires you to matter to another living person. And feel, in the middle of all that plenty, a flat and nameless ache you cannot explain.
Surrounded, comfortable, and alone. Here is where I want you to set the guilt down. That ache is not a defect in you. It is not weakness or ingratitude or some failure to appreciate how good you have it. It is a signal, one of the oldest and most accurate you will ever own. The neuroscientist John Cacioppo spent his career studying loneliness, and what he found is that it works exactly like hunger. Hunger isn't a flaw, it's your body telling you it needs food. Loneliness, Cacioppo showed, is the very same kind of alarm, an evolved signal hundreds of thousands of years old that fires not when you are physically alone, but when you are not truly known. It exists for one reason. Because for every single one of your ancestors, drifting away from the group meant death. And the ache that pulled them back toward the fire is the exact reason you are here to feel it now. So when that pang finds you in a crowded, comfortable, hyper-connected world, your wiring is not broken. It is working perfectly. It is doing the one job it was built to do, telling you that proximity is not the same as belonging, and that you were made for the second one. Universe 25 stands empty now. The mice are long gone. The pen survives as a few photographs in an old paper. And the easy thing, the meme's lesson, is to look at it and feel a small shiver of doom. To decide we are the mice and the cage is quietly closing. But that was never the lesson. Calhoun's mice did not die because there was too much life around them. They died because there was no longer anywhere for that life to mean anything. You are not in a sealed box. You can still leave the apartment, learn a name, become someone's someone. Find the one corner of the world that needs the thing only you can do. The mice could never change their universe. We can still change ours.